My theater department is haunted by the ghost of a murder-rape victim named Cheryl. She was murdered in the 1980s during a volleyball tournament. Her body was found in our school's auditorium in the loft area. There's a cold spot there, and shadows which constantly haunt the theater, lights flickering on and off. She also haunts the restrooms adjacent to the auditorium, particularly the female washroom, where it was assumed that she was raped and beaten. I had an experience with her knocking on the walls of my stall. I assumed it was a friend playing a trick on me. Then I had an amazing feeling of being watched despite realizing no one else was in the washroom with me. As I washed my hands in the basin, a mist-like object floated out of the washroom and into the hall. I was frozen in paralysis, watching this mist-like object, trying to figure out what it was or if I can make out a form. Apparently, an innocent man was convicted of this crime. I gather her soul cannot rest. My niece now attends the school and told me girls turn on the faucets to avoid the knocking and uncomfortable feelings while using the washroom. I do not know what to think, as I was before this experience very skeptical of the paranormal. But after experiencing that feeling in the washroom and hearing of other student stories, I'm beginning to feel that the possibility that the school is haunted is very high. I'd appreciate knowing if any other students from that school or anyone related to anyone who attended that school has any similar experiences. If you know any other stories about the haunting at Corone High, please let me know so I don't feel crazy. This didn't happen to me, but happened to my dad, and he still can't explain it to this day. I have 2 older siblings, including a brother that is 5 years older than me. When my brother Billy was 14 or 15, he was on a swim team at the high school. He had a best friend, Dusty, whom he'd been best friends with since they were babies. Our parents and his parents were also really good friends, and our dads worked together. These 2, however, were inseparable. If you ever couldn't find one of them, your first thought was to figure out where the other was. My family was driving home one night from a swim meet that my brother was in. He was on the bus driving home as well, but Dusty was not a swimmer, and he was at home. A man that my dad worked with called our car phone. This was before cell phones. The conversation soon became very sad, and you could tell that my dad had become very, very upset over something. I was in the back seat with my sister watching as my mom continually asked him, What is it? What happened? After he hangs up, he tells us that Dusty had hanged himself and had died. It was a very sad time after that, as I'm sure you could imagine. I'll never forget hearing my brother's cries when they told him when we met him at the school to take him home. A few weeks later, after things sort of calmed down, my dad was laying in bed about to fall asleep. The phone next to the bed rings and he picks it up. Dusty continually called our house looking for Billy. My dad immediately recognized the voice as his. The conversation, as best as I can remember, went something like this. Is Billy there? No, he's not here right now. Dusty, is that you? Is he okay? Yeah, he's doing all right. And that was the end of it. My dad is a huge skeptic and wouldn't make up a story like this. He swears to this day that it was Dusty that called him that night. Before I begin, I would like to say that this story may seem embellished or altogether fictional. However, this is something that truly happened to me, and I'm reporting it in the most factual manner possible. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them. This event took place 2 years ago. I'd just gotten back from game night at a friend's church, though I was not Christian at the time and still am not. I was sitting around the living room of my parents' house, where my mother and some friends that we had were talking about how wonderful God is. I disagreed with them and could feel the anger building in me, though I did my best to hide it, as I would have gotten in trouble for not following my parents' religion. They went on about God for a good 45 minutes, and during that time, it became harder and harder to conceal my rage, and I felt it as though this level of anger was not possible to be had by a person. Eventually, I was growling under my breath, and though I tried not to, I could hardly stop myself. When the friends, a man and 2 women, a little older than me, noticed this, they suggested that we all hold hands and pray. I held the hands of my mother and the man as they began to pray. I could feel myself digging into their hands with a very strong force. After this had gone on for a while, I can remember dropping suddenly on all 4s and letting out a loud growly scream. At this point, they began to pray over me, and I continued to scream on my living room floor. When this had been going on for some time, the mother of these friends had come over along with the rest of the family to try to help me. I had no idea when they came in because I was fading in and out of consciousness. The moment the mother started to anoint me with oil on my forehead, and I could feel a slight burn, but nothing that would even cause me to say ouch. However, the spirit inside of me was still screaming as if it were on fire, though I felt almost nothing. It sounded as if some unknown language was being spoken when the spirit in me screamed, and to this day I have no idea what the being said. My face felt like it had a buzzing mask attached to it that was slowly pulled away, but was still somehow connected to me. The feeling is similar to what a person feels when they are leaving their body during astral projection, but it was not my soul that was leaving. During that entire episode, my dog had been barking inches from my face in an effort to protect me. I was told this part later because I was unconscious for most of it. He was not barking at me, but as if something were attacking me and he was scaring it away. The praying and screaming continued until around 3 a.m. I cannot remember the spirit leaving me or what happened to end the exorcism. I can only remember sitting on the couch crying and wanting to get away from everyone and just to go to bed. I also have no memory of the following few days after that. Most likely because this event was very traumatic and is to date the most terrifying thing I've lived through. I still do not consider myself to be Christian, and this experience did not convert me. I believe that it was not God's power that was used to help me escape that malevolent spirit, but I do believe that it was their own power and their belief in their ability to help me. I also do not say that this was a demon because I cannot know if it was this or some other kind of being. But it was a spirit that wished to harm me. So I call it a malevolent spirit. It was June 22nd, I believe, when an event I will never forget happened. My cousin and I were at his house when we got bored. We were in Charlottetown, Texas, and we decided to go look at graveyards. He walked by at one point in time. It was 10 p.m. when we went out and started to look for the graveyard. We went down the streets, he remembered, and got turned around 5 times for each time we tried to find it. What was odd is that we tried 5 different streets. We finally tried one of the roads that we had gone down before. We finally found it on a street with a house that was leaking water from the front door. The street was darker than dark, every light off, including the houses next to it and the one by the graveyard. We'd been looking for almost half an hour and were glad to find it. The first thing we noticed were that hundreds of orbs were flying around. There were some floating away from where we were starting to walk, and some that were floating away from the graveyard. I felt this unnatural pull to the graveyard and my cousin stopped short. I asked him what was wrong 3 times, and then he realized that I was halfway between him and the graveyard. He was pointing at the bushes, and I heard a crack from behind me. I turned around to see 2 evil, bright white eyes staring at me and him. I do not jest when I tell you this, because we both saw it. As soon as we did, we ran as fast as we could. We found the same place we walked by, as if there was nothing to it. Even when we couldn't find the right way before. This, of course, was not the first time I had run into such things, but I did not alert my cousin to the situation, seeing as I recognized the eyes. We made it back and alerted my stepbrother back home. We had many encounters that night, and the night after. Truth be told, I'm being watched now. My mom is a first-generation American. Her parents moved from Chihuahua, Mexico to El Paso, Texas, before she was born. The supernatural was very prevalent in both sides of her family. My grandfather claims that we are descended from the Apache warlord Victorio, and that the spirit of Victorio appeared to him and his brothers when he was a young man. My mom had many experiences with ghosts and spirits, but she said that none was more terrifying than her experience with Llorona. Her family lived in a decent-sized house on the banks of a canal in the south side of El Paso. At the time, the family had 3 dogs. My mom describes all of them as the toughest dogs on the block. One night, in the dead of winter, my grandfather was telling my mom one of the many great stories when there was a loud commotion in the front yard where the dogs were. The dogs were barking to wake the dead. My mom and her dad went outside into the front to see what was going on. They were joined by my grandmother. They had not noticed this before, but a fog was slowly creeping around the street. The air was chill, but different from the cold of winter, and the cold went down to the very bone. And the 3 dogs were barking towards the fog, or more accurately, towards the canal that was by the house. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream pierced the night air. My mom described it as the most terrifying cry she has ever heard in her entire life. She says that it lasted for a full minute before finally dissipating. When the scream left, the fog lifted and the dogs returned to the way they were before. My mom asked her dad what the scream was, but all he said was La Llorona, and told her to go to bed. Naturally, she couldn't sleep, and instead listened to her parents debate over whether or not to call the cops and report a murder or something. In the morning, when it was light out, my grandfather went down to the canal, but unsurprisingly found nothing. When he came back, he told my mom the legend of the woman who drowned her own children and is now fated to cry out for them on the banks of the river where she killed them. And to this day, my mom is convinced that she heard La Llorona on that night so many years ago. Another close associate of mine who had a close encounter with La Llorona is my former karate instructor and confirmation class teacher. He's Irish and a devout Catholic, but firmly believes in the existence of ghosts and the paranormal. When he was a teenager, he lived in New Mexico, close to the borders with Texas and Mexico. Like any good teenager looking for a rush, he liked to ride around with his brother after dark and watch for ghosts in the old graveyards. One night, he and his brother managed to convince a couple of girls they were sweet on to come along. They were sitting in the car in the middle of a desert when a deep fog started settling in. They were unsettled and decided to leave, but the car wouldn't start. Suddenly, he says that everything went completely and utterly pitch black, like someone had thrown a tarp over the car. My friend flipped out, but his brothers were frozen in their seats, unable to move a muscle. He yelled, but they still didn't move. He reached over and managed to finally start the car. He was 15 and didn't even have a license, but he drove out of there like a bat out of hell. When his heart finally stopped racing, he stopped the car. He turned to his brother and asked him, "What the hell happened back there?" His brother, with his face still white, asked him incredulously, "Jim, did you not see her?" He shook his head no and asked his brother what he was talking about. His brother told him that when everything had gone black, a strange translucent white woman appeared outside of the car. She looked like a wicked witch. She reached her hand into the car, through the closed window for Jim's neck, but stopped and drew back when she touched it. She then disappeared, and that was when the car started. Jim reached up to his neck and fingered the St. Michael medal he always wore. He firmly believed that the archangel responsible for defeating Satan protected him on that night. Whether the spirit was a demon, Llorona, or some other frightful specter does not matter. Jim is firmly convinced that it was Llorona, and that she was stopped from whatever evil she intended. And he never stops praying to St. Michael. Those were scary stories from Texas. How many of you ghouls live in Texas? Probably a decent amount of you. I couldn't. Too hot. I don't like the heat. I like where I live. I live in PA and it's like mostly cold all the time. It's like literally 9 months of winter and then like 3 of like summer, and that's it. That's what PA is, and it's great because I like it cold. So, yeah, I don't really have anything to say, except I still don't have my fucking car back, and it sucks. So, yeah, I'm still waiting on that. It's been there since, like, the end of December. You ghouls know. Ugh. But anyway, hopefully your days are going better than mine lately. And the stream Saturday will be a thing about, like, mental health, depression, anxiety, OCD, that kind of thing. So if you get, like, triggered by that, or if it's not something that you would like to be present during, you know, just skip Saturdays, this Saturday's stream, because I will probably be talking about, like, you know, suicide attempts and just, like, mental health and what goes along with that and stuff like that. And if you don't want to listen to that or you're not comfortable with it, you know, don't go to this stream. But if you are, please come. You ghouls know I'm very, very, very open about things, so I will answer questions and all that kind of stuff. I don't know about Mike, but I will. So yeah, as always, ghouls, the last video will be on the top left, the next video will be on the bottom left, all my social media is on the screen, as well as in the description box below. And remember, there's always someone or something watching you.